This meeting is being recorded.
Today is a special event. We are going to have Sevilla and Ira, and we're going to be talking about the metaphysics of quality. But the metaphysics of quality, as it's being discussed by Mike Hill and Robert Breedlove, and they are looking at it through the lens of three books, which I'm going to bring up for you here on a share screen. Always takes me a second here. And I think this is, yes, this is the spot right here. So let's take a look at what he's saying here.
To the non-materialist side of reality. And the three books I recommended together were Lila, Human Action by Mises, and Maps of Meaning by Jordan Peterson. And I think these three books jive really well together.
Okay, so you can see the three books. Let's make it full screen here. You can see the three books. We've got Human Action by Ludwig von Mises, Lila by Robert Pirsig, and Maps of Meaning by Jordan Peterson. So in the best way that we possibly can, Sevilla is going to represent Lila, Ira is going to represent Human Action, and I'm going to represent Maps of Meaning, but I'm sure that we'll be all over the place. So anyway, that's the plan. And and so what I want to do is look at a brief clip that comes at the beginning of one of their other videos. That's episode 1. Okay, here we are, episode 3. Yeah, so we're going to look at a brief clip from this Mike Hill, Robert Breedlove series where they start talking about random access memory and dynamic quality, just as a kind of way to segue into the conversation. This is episode 3 of the series with Mike Hill.
That's right. The pursuit of truth, right? Morality is finding the formation.
Yeah.
So random access memory allows for the reconfiguration of the formation.
Yeah, and it's back to this middle way, right? Between static and dynamic, is you need both to really construct meaning, right? Like we're talking about the base level of the computer would be, what did he call them? The flip-flops. I think there's ones or zeros. They're gateways that are letting electricity through or not. It's just binary. And then that filters up through one keyhole or one little aperture to the base level language.
Yeah.
Fortran or Fortran. Yeah. And then that language is so rudimentary that most programmers are writing in a higher language. They don't even understand the base level language, much less the flip-flops. Like the programmers at the physical level need no knowledge of the higher levels and vice versa. The higher level programmers need no knowledge of below it, but they're all critically dependent and interlinked, as you said. And the highest level would be the application. Like if you're actually writing a book on a word processor. I guess you could say it goes one level out too into the English language, right? The application's rendering the English language to you, and that's something else that has to be understood to interpret the book.
The question is, it's too big a subject because we're going to cover this at some point. It goes beyond Lila, but the idea that are there two ends of a spectrum here that are trying to attract each other and meet in the middle? Is the concepts that exist let's come back to that. But effectively, yes, the idea that there is languages in the intellectual patterns that are trying to reach down and manifest themselves. It's earth, heaven and earth.
Yes.
Ideas are heaven.
When I heard him say that, I thought, oh, these guys, I wonder if they've been reading Matthew Peugeot's Language of Creation when they start talking about heaven and earth joining up here. At a certain point, so here, this is where I could ask you, Sevilla, for a little guidance. They're talking here about the way that a computer kind of represents these different levels. Do you remember that without me running it again? Could you go through that?
Yeah, he's trying to show that these four levels, these four evolution, it's like an analogy to the four evolutionary levels too, so you can understand how they work in conjunction with each other. Like they all exist and they do their thing, and as a totality, you know, in this case, it's the computer with the novel on the word processing program. But so
the novel would be the conceptual, the idea level.
Yeah.
And then the word processing application.
That would be the social level.
Would be the social level.
That's the analogy for the social level. The machine language is the biological level, and the flip-flops is the inorganic. They don't map exactly onto that, obviously.
The flip-flops are just the zeros and ones, the gateways that are built into the chip, basically.
It's the actual. It's like the chip is now, I think. I mean, a computer person would you know.
Yeah, it's the physical manifestation, whatever it is, of those then following ideas. I mean, the zeros and ones in the physical machine then get represented as commands or something in a machine language, or he talks about Fortran. That's dating quite a bit. I mean, that's what I learned 40 years ago. But then you have a language, and then which turns into maybe a word processing software, which then gets turned into, as Sevilla said, a novel.
Yeah.
And then even they mentioned, then after that, somebody has to read the novel, and it goes up to their meaning, I suppose. I mean, however you might define
and language has to exist in order for the novel to be read. But,
right.
but below the machine level, the part that was missing for me when he said this is, well, what about the designer of the machine? Right? I mean, if you're going to use a computer as an example, then you're implicit in that is that computer came from somewhere.
Yeah.
And the somewhere put together all those levels. They didn't just happen.
Well, there's a little bit more to this analogy.
Okay.
So you have, let's just say, the inorganic level, and there's going to be something that bridges the two. And that's this machine language thing is the analogy he has. And that's going to be the inorganic to the biological, which is this carbon becoming so complex that it actually turns into something, you know, like the most rudimentary biological form. I think, you know, I may be wrong about this, but this is close enough, is DNA, which is one protein and one, whatever you call the dynamic part. The dynamic part of DNA is in the middle, the part that can change and upgrade, and it's protected by proteins. So that's or a virus even, I think is what
virus,
the virus is the most, and DNA is like an example of how the static and the dynamic, the static protects the dynamic, which is an important component. But in this analogy, there's always a little step, there's a ratchet in between the two that turns into the next level that you can kind of trace the one level going to the other. But once the level is established, it becomes its own thing. So in the computer analogy, each level, while they're related, right, they evolve from each other. This is like the emergence that Glenn was talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Once it is established as a thing, then it has its own morality, functionality. Yet at the same time, they all operate in tandem to create this larger thing. So if you're going into the larger thing, I would say that Pirsig is saying that it's kind of a weird combination, in my opinion. It's like all four levels are emergent. At the same time, they are all created by this one, by quality. Quality is the impetus, and it goes towards quality, and it is stimulated by quality. So if you're looking for what is that makes everything, it's quality.
I think there's a picture that he's got. I think it runs
a lot of pictures. They do. They have a nice job.
Really nice job.
Yeah, this is really cool. Yeah.
I think it might be right about here. Well, this is a really important picture here, but that's not the one I wanted. The one I wanted.
Yeah, here they superimposed the different levels onto the tree.
Yeah, but it was a different. I don't think I can find it. Oh, maybe it is this one here, where he's talking about all these different levels going up.
On each other, they're all interdependent. If an intellectual idea destroys the society upon which it rests, then it's self-defeating.
Yes.
And if the society which comes up with rules for communal guidelines, if they betray those rules, it just exactly, and then you go down the path of evolution. Yeah. So with that setup in mind,
and each higher layer,
right there. See, he's got the levels going up, but then he also has the influence of the levels coming down, which is what Matthew Pajot is always talking about when he talks about heaven informing earth and earth expressing matter.
Yeah.
So
and Karen, I don't know if you noticed that Breedlove had I think more than one, at least a couple of conversations with Jonathan Pajot. So he's very familiar with that.
No, I didn't know that. I'm gonna have to watch those. That would be fascinating because
I think I only saw one of them, but a recent one. It was only back in December, something like that.
Yeah, it was fairly recent.
I really like this. For me, I would rather see this up above the pyramid, this very top level, up above the pyramid. But anyway, other than that, it's a very nice picture of things. The way that heaven is informing and then earth is expressing, and it's the union of the two. So in episode 1, I think, is that where I'm at now? No, I'm in episode 3. Episode 1. Okay, here's where this is why we have Ira here.
Okay.
And in a nutshell, that is the Copernican perspectival revolution here, as it's swapping out A causes B for B values precondition A. And it just, again, the data is the same, but the interpretation.
So he's saying that rather than causation, which was Aristotle's big idea, that causation was fundamental, Pirsig's big idea is that values are fundamental. And so he swaps out causation for value, which we'll get into later. But here's where it gets into Ira.
And changes radically. And I think this coheres well with the fundamental axiom of Austrian economics, which is man must act. This means that an action is distinguished from behavior, and that action expresses purpose, right? And purpose is always aimed towards value, right? And I've said this many times, but to even walk across the room, you have to value the other side of the room more than you value where you're at currently. So we could say all action is irrefutably an expression of value. Value is inspiring all action. And if I zoom out to the universe and we see, okay, the only thing that doesn't change in the universe is change itself. The whole universe is ceaselessly changing. Change is action, but action is value expressed. So I think the big divide here is we used to draw this bright line and say, all right, we're humans, we act with purpose, but things beneath us, animals and inorganic reality, just act based on instinct or causality. Pirsig's just saying, no, that's wrong. What you think you know here at the human level, it is translatable all the way down. So we have.
Okay, so I don't want to risk jumping onto another video at this point, the way the algorithm works. But he said man must act, and that's the fundamental axiom of Austrian economics, that action is different than behavior in that action always has purpose, and that purpose leads to value. And then he went into this change, action, value expressed kind of circle. Maybe I can get back to that. Yeah, right there.
Change is action, but action is value expressed. So that's
what I wanted to ask you about, Ira. Does he have it?
Yeah.
Does he have the basics down right here on human action? Is that the main
Well,
fundamental idea?
I think one thing, certainly von Mises, maybe there's a little bit of background about that book. There's a book called Human Action by von Mises, and the whole story of the book and his life is quite a story, I mean, in a sense, and in Austrian economics. But Austrian economics per se started in like the 1870s, 1880s by somebody named Bohm-Borch and a couple of others. I don't pronounce the name right, but the big thing was changing from value being like labor theory of value or capital theory of value, of some way of counting up, this has so much value in that, to value is subjective. And that subjective theory of value just totally turned everything around. And that was the fundamental. And von Mises was kind of a second generation of then taking that fundamental axiom and others that follow from it to apply to more and more questions. And also, to think about his life, he's in Vienna, so Freud is there, Mach and positivism, and just an incredible milieu of different schools of thought, and how literally they would get together for seminars and coffee shops and all these other kind, the Vienna lifestyle there. And von Mises became the one of the Austrian school that, in a sense, was the most rigorous. He just absolutely just wouldn't compromise on those fundamental axioms that were important, he found important, and he built on those. He is very, very famous for saying basically socialism could never work, where there would be no more money, because the money is the way of expressing value among all the participants. And so eventually there would be no information exchange possible, and then the system would collapse. And this is sort of, the Soviet Union at the end. So anyway, in the sense of human action as being the basis, and then finally when von Mises made it to New York in the 40s, he put all of his learning together. He has several books and a big book in German into an English version, which he learned English just to write the book, like at 60 years old, which is pretty amazing. And
yes.
that comes, human action. So the part that's there as being fundamental, though, in the part between animals, he actually treats those kind of things in the first part of the book, recognizing, that sense of, because people would say is, people don't act with purpose. They, what they're driven by, all the things of the brain consciences. We could look from everybody would be looking in Vervaeke and around, left brain, right brain. And what my interpretation of what von Mises does is he doesn't treat those things. He doesn't go into super depth, but he recognizes all these issues as being fundamental. But when he starts talking about economics, he says, well, it doesn't make a difference. Wherever that purpose came from, to say, I value this more, like he said, I value walking across the room or drinking a glass of water and then acting on it, that's all I need to start and talking about explaining this world of exchange, the way the human beings work. In
other words, he was agnostic about whether or not it was a completely material world that was just driven by material impulses, or whether there is some deeper meaning. That wasn't important to the basic idea that in order to move from A to B, you have to think that B is better than A, otherwise you wouldn't move there, which is what Peterson always talks about.
His own personal religious views or other things, I think he was atheistic, seemed to be that way. But in human action itself, he's the version, he really tries almost all the things in some way, even Pirsig and also, again, remember people are talking about values of Soviet man, of Aryan, way of thinking. They says, no, those are wrong. Human beings act in this way with value and purpose in that sense. And so he recognizes these are issues, but then says, for what this book is about in economics, we don't have to say where the value came from or where the purpose came from, but it's there.
Okay, but it's correct to say that man must act is kind of the fundamental premise of the book.
Yeah, and then the one other little tweak though from what Breedlove was saying, and maybe this sense of going all the way down. I was just looking at he makes a distinction between human behavior and animal behavior as being different. So I don't know how that necessarily, again, is probably one of those things that in the weeds might make a difference in how people would view, say, what Breedlove's interpretation of what von Mises was saying, or what the reality is by anybody else might be looking at that question. But von Mises makes a distinction. It's human action, not biological action.
Okay, so when Breedlove is talking about this little triangle or this three-part circle here, is this a part of human action, that change is basic and that change leads to action and action leads to value?
Basically, one of the things that happened a lot, and you see in this book like von Mises, the first time I read it, and then in Rothbard, is a lot talking about the evenly circulating economy. I might have the terms wrong, but where basically everything stays the same. And in that world, this is where economists can make calculations. So von Mises is very much against the calculations and the math. And one of his things to say is because that circulating even economy doesn't exist. It's always changed. That's why entrepreneurial activity is fundamental, because conditions are always changing. So in that sense, again, I would change value and action without those little nuances of things that I would say, well, there's a bit of a flag that I would raise to discuss with a Mises scholar, say. But those three in combination, the way the image is on its face just sitting there, I think is pretty good.
Okay, well, that's interesting. So it's because I wasn't quite sure what he meant by change there, but it's because the economy is always changing, and so that means that to some extent, there are a lot of incalculable variables that are always changing all the time in between, because it's built up relationships amongst people, right?
But it could be from, right now I'm content. I had dinner an hour ago. I'm not going to get up to go eat. Maybe in an hour, I'm going to get up and go eat. I mean, it goes to every kind of level of things that are changing. Now I don't need to sleep. I'm going to need to sleep pretty soon. Whatever it would be as an individual, and then maybe in the Pirsig sense of what they're describing, the quality sense that goes all the way down.
Yeah, well, you're talking about
homeostasis.
Like what you're talking about is, biologically you're going to have to sleep, biologically you're going to have to go eat. Once those are taken care of, those biological urges aren't calling to you right now. Right now, you're here talking, and so the intellectual value is front and center.
Yeah.
But they're all going to be working, they're all going to, the value is going to be there. It's just going to be coming from different places.
And the value is what's driving the action.
Value, like in Pirsig, it's value first. It's the perception of value.
Right.
Which leads to action, which leads to change.
You're going to move forward because something seems better to you than where you're at.
Yeah.
And that move forward may be based on a biological drive, or it may be based on an intellectual drive.
It's just based, the value itself is spontaneous. You don't really have control of that. The value is pre-intellectual, so it's going to be there, and it's going to come front and center. What you do with that, there's a number of things you can do with that. The action can be a variety of things.
There may be a little bit difference in the definition of value as used by, say, von Mises and Pirsig in the way they're using value. So, because another one of the major aspects of subjective theory of value is like marginal utility. A glass of water is worth a lot more to me, it's valued much more if I've been in the desert for a week than if I'm, sitting at the lakeside or whatever you would say by the stream. So it's not inherent in the stuff. It's subjective to my conditions, say, where I would put a different value on those things. And then those are obvious ones, but we could go on and on about those subjective differences that changes value. And another way it's looked at in the Austrian economics world that I would interpret is there's an ordinal sense. And I think they talk about it in the videos of where when I start to act, I have essentially one thing I can be doing, or maybe an easier way. There's, what am I going to do with my money? And I have to say, I'm going to value it and come up to a ranking to say, well, I can only do this. I can't do everything because they're lower on my ranking. And so where all that comes into the way Pirsig would use the word value versus we're mixing things going on that's happening at a much more complex level in the Pirsig world than that end aspect, which is economics, say.
Right. Yeah, like in Mises, sorry.
I was just going to say, this issue of what we mean by value is very, very important to clear up here, because for two reasons. When Mike Hill and Robert Breedlove are talking, they talk a lot about the problem with Aristotle. Aristotle's paradigm for the world was a subject-object paradigm, and all the problems that that's caused throughout history, because in Aristotle, you can't, because Aristotle was wrong, because you can't say that something is in the subject or in the object. It actually exists somewhere in between the two, outside of this, or it's the relationship between the subject object and then this area around them and between them. So it's a much bigger problem than just subject object. But Aristotle has this very static universe built out of this subject object idea. But then when you get into Marxian economics, he was using value as being completely objective, the cost of materials plus the cost of labor. And if you raised the cost, then you were oppressing the laborer. And so it was all screwed up. So Austrian economics comes in and says, no, the value is subjective. The value is in the person who's making the decision about whether to trade or not trade, whether to exchange or not exchange. That value is internal to the subject. So either we have to choose to use a different word for Pirsig, like quality or something, or we have to define what he means by value versus what Austrian economics means by value. Otherwise, we run into this subject-object dualism problem.
Well, you could use, with Pirsig, you could use dynamic quality, because that's the, that's the agent of change, the stimulus that allows for the perception of what's better and then prompts the action, which of course results in change. But I think that the one way to look at this, if you're looking at this through the Pirsig lens, I would say that since what Ira just said is this is within the context of economics. So in the Pirsig frame, I like it's like Pirsig is a metaphysics, so it's going to apply to everything all the time. So in economics is a very, very high quality static pattern of social value. This exists within the social level. And so
I think von Mises might agree with that. I mean, in the sense of he puts it in some differentiation between the rest of, say, even human behavior, psychology, and then into the animal world, the physical, whatever it would be. That's what he's getting at, and that's what I was saying with this image being in economics, but there is something else about how your body's going to, how in your mind you come up with this has more value than something else, or if we use the Pirsig term, recognize the quality in it.
Yeah.
Well, because economic value is not pre-intellectual. Economic value to the individual is based on a set of calculations that are idiosyncratic to that individual. So it's not pre-intellectual. So that's why I like using dynamic quality.
Yeah. Dynamic quality takes the stuff the individual already knows, which are those patterns that are already established in terms of economic value. And then with that informing it with the new thing here between the two, you've got already what you value economically, let's just say, with your budget or whatever the individual values based on what they've already learned about money and in their own particular circumstance. And going forward, what they value next, like maybe the best deal, I suppose, would be something. Or the best.
I think it's maybe a little bit more nuanced than that for von Mises' standpoint, because what he would say is, I can't say where the value, say, would be to become a hermit and live in the desert by myself. He doesn't know. But when they're acting to go into the desert, then he's taken this kind of value. There's a value somewhere in the person to become a hermit, and then they act on it in that way.
Yeah.
But where that came from, the exchange of dynamic quality, say, of how the person comes to this belief, that's where von Mises, he's already got a 1,000-page book or something. He says, I'm not going to go in it. Maybe he has ideas about that. In other places, you could find lots of ideas about different things. But
well, I guess my other question is, Sevilla, you said that economics is a static pattern in the social level. But when I think, I guess maybe because when I studied Austrian economics, and I never studied it to the depth that Ira did, but I did study it somewhat back in the early 80s when I was a legislator, and I went to a week-long conference at the Foundation of Economic Education, had the opportunity to sit at the feet of Israel Kirchner, which was an amazing experience, learning from him. He was
a student of von Mises, I believe.
Was he? Well, he was amazing.
Yeah, he was in the seminar anyway.
What I felt coming out of that was that what they had tapped into was a picture of the way the universe works. That economics was not just a category or not just a particular domain of knowledge, but that the way human action, it is human action. It's the way all of humanity responds to reality, basically, is what economics is. So I guess I don't think of it as a static pattern in the social sphere, but it's way more connected to this whole idea of kind of how this dynamic quality functions in the universe, in every arena. It's more like, how I said when I started my channel that I had this idea that somehow the way art works is a framework that maps right onto how the universe works. And I think economics is another one of these frameworks that maps onto the universe. And I think this metaphysics of quality thing is a framework that maps onto the universe.
Right.
So I think that these things they're each maps. They may not be complete maps, but Pirsig wouldn't have said that the metaphysics of quality would he have said that it was a static pattern on the social level?
No, he's saying that is the driver of it. That's a way of describing everything. Describing, let's just say, using economics, you could say it's the economics of reality, because if you're using economic, like I thought we were, because I don't know about Austrian economics, and now since you just told me that, if he's using economics in that sense, he's using economics in the understanding of the dynamics of reality. And you could use economics in that way, because it's like you could also use it in like, I think that probably Freud could use that as the economics of the energy of the psyche. If you're using it that way, that is a similar metaphysics, I think, to the metaphysics of quality.
Because I think it's the way cells work. I think if you go as far down into the biological world as you want, and you're going to run into Austrian economics.
kind of it's a little nuance between what you're both saying,
Mhm.
in the sense of when I was first reading von Mises and started to understand it, I really had the sense of, okay, this I see as true, as a basis of reality, and it like the theory of gravity, and I know if I drop something, it falls.
exactly.
Yeah.
But so that's in a dynamic world. You're applying this model to a dynamic world, but the model itself, in a sense, becomes static. It's not a totally new thing to invent every time. And maybe that's where
Yeah.
there's,
I see
again, a
what
little
you're
bit
saying.
different of how we talk about things, because I thought those guys were saying that before. That physics that built up now over the centuries is becoming static,
Yeah.
in that we think we know it, or it's in the chaos order
Okay,
thing.
okay. So it's at that edge of knowledge, right?
So
Yeah.
I see what you're saying. So yes, the metaphysics of quality is an intellectual pattern of value. To talk about it and to write about it and to say this and this is how it works, that's an intellectual pattern of value. The metaphysics itself, and probably the economics of von Mises, let's say, is something you can't, once you articulate it, it has to become an intellectual pattern of value, because in the articulation it becomes that.
Right. Okay.
But-
I get it now.
Yeah, but the actual metaphysics itself is beyond, just like they were what we observe as to the nature of reality. But just like all spiritual things, and then you go into that domain, of metaphysics being, being some type of in the spiritual domain, then it's ineffable. So the only way to even get a handle on it is you have to intellectualize it.
Okay, so let's go back to episode let's go back to episode 3. Universality of value, is that? No, I have too many videos up here. Episode 3. Let's go back to episode 3 and take a look at the fractal structure of value, because I think this might help us a little bit.
But clearly they exist on much different scales. So this structure that we're describing, this metaphysical, even theological structure, which again, it's in the Bible as well, is describing this fractal structure of quality or value in existence or in being.
Yeah, it's staggering. Like, even hearing you sort of say it like that feeds back into an example that I was going to use, which was that in the inorganic pattern of values, when we had the void and post Big Bang, and matter is just flying around the universe and things are beginning to form, the planets are formed by mass attracting itself to each other, and then when the planets all begin to settle in their, let's say, community of gravitational love, for the sake of a better word, they're attracted to each other. They form these larger and larger objects until they stabilize. This goes back to Bitcoin. The planets stabilize, and then once they stabilize on the surface, biological patterns start to emerge on the surface.
Right.
And the biological patterns then create a fractal allowance for the attraction between biological entities to start communicating and collaborating, and then we get social patterns of value. The social patterns of value then start to communicate with each other and share cultural ideas, and then we get intellectual patterns of value. But the irony is that, going back to the logos, which is what you said, which is when ideas collect together under a common, let's say, title, which is a conception that we use. Well, the word is the same as the original inorganic patterns of value forming a planet, which is mass that has minimal significance in itself, accumulates until it becomes a center of gravity for other things to emerge from it. And that's what happens with logos. Logos, when a word has enough critical mass that it accumulates meaning in itself, then from that meaning that is the accumulation of all those values in that word then becomes a stepping stone for a new word, which is why which is why etymology is effectively an alchemical process, which is why all languages across the world are effectively trees. They all go back to the root of Proto-Indo-European.
Now, this is something I've talked about a number of times on the channel, about how fascinating it is that all these languages go back to this one language, which sounds a lot like what pre-Tower of Babel language. I'm just saying, you know, it's pretty interesting.
Wow.
So when you think about it, that the word of logos is literally a tree. Like not logos isn't literally meaning a tree, but language itself, the word that the Bible talks about, and logos,
language is fractal.
Language is fractal.
Yeah, and etymology is walking backwards through the fractal.
Yes, it's walking backwards through the.
Now here's this tree. I love that picture that he just said, language is walking backwards through the fractal. Okay, so if you take this as, well, I'll let them finish their description, and then I'm going to describe it a little bit different way.
And then when you get to the root of the fractal of the language, then you end up finding yourself underground where the seeds of that fractal tree started, and underground where that intellectual pattern of value started. You're in the soil of the social patterns of value, which is why Jordan Peterson talks explicitly about the idea that you cannot separate the intellectual value system from the underlying cultural value system. Because its roots are in the social patterns of value. Yes. And the fractal emerges from it. And then from that tree of logos, a new tier that we can't even imagine, a new dimension will emerge from the branches of that tree. So it's a constant fractal outgrowing.
So going back to the tree picture,
where that intellectual goes through the fractal, and then when you get to the root of.
So here's the tree. The way they're describing it, you can't divide off these social and intellectual ideas from their foundation, which is here in the biological and the inorganic. But I think there's another way to look at this tree. When you think about the word logos, or the word, is if we think of the logos as a seed, and if we think of this picture as running through history, which basically is what he's talking about, because even through history, you have the inorganic, and then you have the biological, and then you have the social, and then you have the intellectual, is also running through history. But at a certain point in history, the seed is manifest on earth and grows into this dynamic tree that puts out its branches into all of history, you know, a la Tom Holland's book Dominion. But simultaneously that it's putting the branches out into history forward, it's also putting its roots out into history going backwards. So when Jordan Peterson was talking about the nature of the Bible being the first book, that book also gets, the Old Testament actually gets rewritten by the story of Christ, because once Christ is manifest on earth, all the stories in the Old Testament begin to make sense through the lens of Christ. And so that's these roots going back down through history that springs from this moment when the seed is bursting forth, coming out of the dark, you know, the dark, wet soil, and then breaking forth into this glorious tree. It's at the same time the roots grow. It's not like things grow from the roots up. They grow from a seed, and then the seed puts roots down and a tree up.
That would be my one comment, or a comment, is it's an interesting metaphor, and you can get some different things out of it, but it's not exactly right. You know, there's a lot of places there where you go, well, you know, the roots are growing at the same time the tree's growing, and the branches are growing. I mean, those things are happening, say, simultaneously, or maybe it's more, you know, I don't know plant biology so well. Also, you know, the term fractal, what it means, etc. But that sense of, though, of there is roots that are close to the inorganic world, and coming out of that is social, biological life, and then social life, and etc. I think that is a helpful way of thinking of the world, say, again, as a model.
Yeah. I think that this tree in Metaphysics of Quality, my instinct, and I may be wrong about this, but my instinct is it's a better way to understand how dynamic quality creates reality than it is to understand the evolutionary levels.
Okay,
Because
same
like
thought.
I was saying, the roots are growing at the same time as the tree. Well, in Pirsig's model, you have the whole inorganic level is so static in the sense that the elements don't really ever change. At least I don't. Like hydrogen is never, at least in what we're looking at, in the perspective we're looking at, which is, I mean, in our sense, eternal. In our experience, eternal. Hydrogen atoms aren't going to grow into other things. At lower down. That's the bottom of matter, is a hydrogen atom. Let's just say. I mean, I know there's other perspectives, but let's, for the sake of efficiency, let's just say and it's not going to, unless sure, intellectually you look at quantum and math can maybe reveal smaller particles. Maybe that's one way to look at it. I don't know. But as far as, but that's just intellectual revelation. That's not changing the actual structure of the inorganic level. Whereas,
isn't that part of his metaphysics, though, is that the way that one level can impact another level is to move it out of a static pattern into a dynamic pattern by informing it from a higher level. Here's a very simplistic idea. When a plant begins to put roots down into the soil, if the plant can take root in the soil, even if the soil is quite compacted, the action of the roots on the soil are going to loosen the soil up and make room for other growth to come in, like worms and little critters could get down in there in the soil, and then they begin eating minerals and defecating and adding tilth to the soil. And so a plant putting down roots can actually rejuvenate the soil. And so in that sense, the higher is bringing dynamic quality down into the lower, right?
Yeah.
So the intellectual can express, can inform the lower in a lot of ways like that.
No, absolutely. But I'm just saying that this tree itself implies that the inorganic is growing deeper and deeper as the intellectual grows up. And that's why I'm saying that it's more of a metaphor for the nature of how dynamic quality works on everything than it is for the actual evolutionary structure, if that makes sense.
I think it's back to my point, I guess, agreeing with Sevilla's, if you try to make the metaphor too precise, it kind of breaks down. Either you make it in time or you make it just in the different levels. I think the sense of looking at that is the way they did it, of just saying, there's this base organic level and then the things build. Okay, yeah, that's good. Of course, then we know, like Karen said, but those things feed back. And they did have the one case Karen showed earlier of the arrows going both directions, which is much more dynamic, and we could look at that. It says, just for me personally, if you get a plant biologist, to look at this, well, maybe that's always the problem. Then you lose the sense of what they're actually trying to say.
Any of these things, they're stories. Like one of the things I like about Wolfram's kind of new theory is that whether his theory is true or not, one of the things that falls out of it is that it's the location of the observer in the system that determines what slice of computational reducibility that they're going to see. So in Pirsig's position in the world, he had this slice of the universe where he could see the metaphysics of quality. That was the map that he could see, but maybe a biologist is going to see a different picture of how the whole thing works, and a mathematician is going to see a different picture of how and each of them is seeing a slice of the areas that are computationally reducible, because that's all we can see. We can't understand the computationally irreducible. We can't see it. Although almost all of the universe is computationally irreducible, we somehow are able to see some little slice of it that makes sense to us. And on a much simpler level, that would just be stories. The way I tell a story about my day, because maybe a gajillion things happened in my day that I wasn't even aware of, but I can remember certain things that made sense to me. And so I tell that story.
Right.
So it's a way of navigating through the world.
One of the things I thought they did nicely a couple times in the series, I don't remember exactly which episode, but they showed a right circular cylinder viewed from the side and then viewed on end. So from one perspective, you see a rectangle, and from the other perspective, you see a circle, if you look at the shadow. And in going back to Plato's cave, what you see at the shadow and what your worldview is. And the another one, and it came further from that, they showed the Copernican revolution of the model change. All the facts, the data was the same, from one that was these complicated twirly things to make what you saw in the sky, to the very simple concentric circles. Again, not perfect, but that just change of worldview and how you see things is amazing. What, for so many people, the whole idea of a different worldview just is so hidden to them, that there is the only one way. I mean, in today's world, we're really living through that.
That's
So,
very true.
So
again,
I want to put in
this thing is really nice.
I want to put in a plug for people to watch the whole series, because
I
it's
agree.
really quite educational. Even though, I mean, there's areas in there that I see slightly different way, or certain things that I don't agree with that they said, but the whole series is just tremendously educational, and the way they riff off of each other and go deeper and deeper because of their knowledge.
But one
really
of the things
cool.
that, speaking as like an older and older guy, is the sense of the things that I've been interested in, are like out of step, not popular, old guys, like Austrian economics, say. And Breedlove and Hill, especially Breedlove, I didn't really know of him before, but did he talk to Jordan Peterson or somebody?
He did. Jordan Peterson asked about Bitcoin, and he had a couple guys. Breedlove was one of them.
He was one of them.
Yeah.
They're young or youngish, attractive, they're talking about like our books, in a way, between all of them, but which is a good sign to me. It makes, just again, it's looking at the world today to see younger people finding the sense of where this kind of I'm looking for the right words, of knowledge or meaning or whatever it would be, whatever we're doing on the, in the little corner of the internet, moving forward into the world and understanding it better by finding these things and getting out of some of the bad narratives, I would say, that are out there.
I think that's right.
That's nice. I mean, it's just a nice thing.
It is very nice.
Well, so Sevilla, how did you stumble onto Pirsig? I'm going to stop for a minute because we're tired looking at that tree.
I was looking at, it was right about the same time I started watching Peterson, which is 2015. And I had known about Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance for a long time. And it just kind of, I don't know, the vibe around Peterson, even it's on his reading list, but I didn't get it from that. It's just the vibe around what he was saying. Somehow, maybe there was a reference to it in one of the videos he that I linked to or something. But for whatever reason, I picked up Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance at that time. And it just really paralleled what he was saying about, it's meaning, not matter, that whole a total shift in perception from it's not matter, it's what matters. That is like a huge paradigm shift. And I think that kind of, for me, has always been representative of this paradigm shift we're talking about, from materialistic to this other way of seeing things, these other ways of knowing, these other, value first way of understanding, which is why so many scientists and religious people can come together in this corner. Scientists, so many different people who see things in this way can come together in this corner. So that's how I discovered him. But talking.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to make sure that Karen talks a little bit about maps of meaning at some point.
Well, I mean, I think we're talking about maps of meaning in all of this, because the thing that I like about maps of meaning isn't all the highfalutin language, highfalutin ideas and history and everything that are in there, although those are fascinating, and there's, you get a master's degree reading the book, but
sure.
It's the simplest ideas that are in there that you can grab hold of and live with. And just that simple paradigm of what happens in the story of a human being who moves from A to B. You have to have some purpose to move. First of all, why did the chicken cross the road? It's a simple thing. Why do I get up and go over there? It's because I want a cup of coffee. Well, yeah, but there may be a lot of other calculations that go into that, but there's some sort of calculation, and there's some impulse that's driving me to go there. Then he goes into the whole thing about interest and how there's this interest that draws you forward. And he made the comment in one of his videos, I'm not sure if it's in the book or in a video, that interest out in front of you that's drawing you forward is actually your future calling you forward. Now that's a lot of woo right there. That's a lot of woo. He
talks about that a lot. I mean, that's one of his repeated themes.
I think that he gets that from Binswanger and Boss, because I think it comes from this idea of the phenesthai, or the phenomenon that's shining out in front of you. And it doesn't have to be as much as, oh, I'm going to go study philosophy. It can be the smallest moment in front of you, the thing that's shining in front of you. If your attention is focused in the right place, then that thing that's shining in front of you is that quality that's moving you forward in your life. It's moving you towards quality instead of away from quality. And okay, I'm going to give you just a broad perspective here on, I don't even know what, I know what it came out. It came out of, they have a discussion, which I think is, I could let them say it, but I'll just recap it. They're talking about the word God, and how in the Sanskrit, the etymology of God is exchange. And if you look closely at the screen when they talk about it, they've got the definition written up in the background, and what's written up there is gut, G-H-U-T, either means to come back or return, or to barter or exchange. So it's a very interesting way to look at God. And many thoughts come to mind, but one of the thoughts that come to mind is the exchange that takes place in the relationship. Because God gives himself for us, and then when he gives himself for us, and then we become a part of him, then our desire is to give ourselves for others, and so it goes out in this fractal nature. And for some reason, it reminded me of this verse. The verse popped into my head from 2 Chronicles chapter 16, verse 9, which is, "For the eyes of the Lord roam to and fro upon the earth, to show himself strong on behalf of those whose hearts are fully his." And I thought, now, why did that come into my mind when I'm thinking about this idea when Breedlove and Hill are talking about exchange? And then I realized that one of the principles that's in Peterson's book that's also in the Bible is you become like what you focus on. Right? So if you focus on the greatest good of which you can conceive, which is Peterson's idea, and then you move forward with that in mind, it brings into your field of salience the things that are important to achieve that goal, so that you can keep moving towards it. In Pirsig's picture here, there are all these different levels, and so your attention can go many different places. One of the things he says is when he's talking about don't let your biological level drive your motion forward, because your biological level can call out and say, oh, eat that piece of cake, or oh, you know, stay in bed instead of going out and go for a run or whatever. That's your biological level trying to hold you back. But so it made me think about how if we keep our focus on higher things, and then the picture that came to my mind is the picture of a mother and baby, because the mother is gazing with love at the baby. The mother's not becoming like the baby, but the baby is learning the mother's gaze and looking back at the mother with that same look of love. And the baby is becoming more like the mother. So the mother gazing at the baby brings the baby into gazing at the mother, and the baby becomes more like the mother. And that's this idea of keeping your gaze upward and not downward. I mean, if you are going to gaze downward, it's for the purpose of drawing upward. And if you're going to gaze upward, it's the purpose of being pulled upward, right? Oh, yeah. And so when we think about God being exchange, he's looking down at us with this gaze of love in order to bring us up. And then our gaze looks up towards him. So there's this exchange idea going on. And the exchange is his life for mine, his breath for mine. He's holding the whole universe together. It's that. So for me, the dynamic quality picture, I really like a lot of the things that Pirsig is saying, but for me, the dynamic quality that's calling us forward is this gaze of God towards us, which is always a gaze of love. And it's that love that's always drawing us forward.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful and brilliant. That's perfect. Yeah. It's keeping us going and drawing us forward at the same time.
Yeah, that's the foundation underneath. Yeah. That's the exactly. With the computer, it's what's underneath the computer.
Yeah, right? It supports us and propels and calls us at the same time.
Yeah,
and so it's that the word good and God and good. They're all etymologically the same, and so good, of course, is quality.
Which brings me back to the Austrian economics thing, because the goods are what we exchange with one another. So that's the whole exchange idea, right? And I think one of the things that the Austrian economists saw, I think probably this goes back even to Adam Smith and maybe before him, is that for an exchange to be, for an exchange to actually work or to end up not becoming a static, dead thing, there has to be, what I offer has to be of high enough quality so that you want it. And what you're going to give me in exchange for it is of high enough quality that I want it. So you have to be giving to each other something so that the exchange actually creates another good almost in the middle of the exchange.
Well, it becomes, again, to take the more prosaic economics view of it, is if we're exchanging freely, that you value what I have more than I value what you have. If it's money in a good, I'd rather have the good than the money, and I give it to you. You having the good, you'd rather have the money than the good. And that may be because you're a farmer and you've got 150 pumpkins, and I'm a consumer and I don't have any. So I'm ready to give you money because you have plenty of pumpkins, and we make the exchange. And if it can stay on that very narrow level, then you know it has to be good. It's good for everybody. It's good. Both people, which again is very different than, say, a Marxist view, where it's always an exploitation.
Mm-hmm.
In this sense, it's always a benefit for everybody if it's a free market. That's where the free market good comes from. Goods are exchanged, and it's good for both parties. Otherwise, they wouldn't make the exchange. And then it builds from there.
Well, that's another thing that Breedlove and Hill start talking about, is this idea that dynamic quality is always moving towards freedom.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So before I go on about that, Sevilla, do you want to say a little bit about that?
Well, Pirsig says, and it makes sense in observation, that there's always a compulsion to be free of whatever's holding you, whatever's holding you back. Like, and purely biologically, hunger is the law of entropy, I guess, or hunger is like directing you. You stay hungry, you're going to die, right? So freedom is to stay alive. So you eat, and there's freedom in that. That's just one example. Like moving across the room to get something increases, your autonomy. Your autonomy itself is freedom. So as you move across the room to get something, you're more free because you've exercised autonomy in that case. So you can look at it in a variety of ways. What Pirsig says is, you've got the laws. Let's just say you've got the law of gravity. So a biological creature is going to try to. Biology, the point of biology is to overcome the inorganic laws, like the laws of entropy and the law of gravity. So biological information, forms, biological creatures have done that. The biology, to ratchet up to the biological level, means that you now have life kind of overcomes, the inorganic state, and being able to walk on the earth overcomes like what an inorganic material is. Just, it sits there. And so life can now move around and do things, and a bird can overcome the law of gravity. So there's all that freedom in that, and freedom in numbers. Like a bunch of animals do much better than one in terms of preserving freedom, in terms of preserving life, and that eventually becomes social. So everything, if you look at it, if you analyze it, is towards freedom.
But what I hear you saying, and because one of the questions I bumped up against when I heard him say that, I think you've kind of answered here, because you do come up against a limit. If you take, let's say that cells are always working towards freedom, working towards quality, but then once the human body is complete, then the cells have to submit to the head of the body and not try to get free of the body. There's some sort of submission that takes place there, so that then all the bodies can begin working together to create this freedom.
Yeah,
as human bodies, right? Or as organisms, right? In their communities.
Yeah, an organism can, the cells are freer with the organism. Ultimately, as one thing, they are freer with the organism because the organism can walk around. When the cells
and because the head of the organism will take care of and rule over the body, so that the cells that are inside are safe, right?
Right, and
perfect
so
picture of the beautiful hierarchy, I think.
Yeah, exactly. So ultimately, there's more freedom the more you allow the higher level to dominate. The totality is going to have more freedom, because the intellect has more agency than anything else ultimately, but it has to be supported by all these other levels. So if something wants to go off and be free on its own, if a cell wants to replicate through cancer and kill kill the organism. You know, the cells are doing great. You know, they're replicating. There's a lot more of them there. But that's the wrong kind of freedom, because that's undermining the other layers. They're no longer supportive of the other layers.
That's
So
one of the things Michael Levin talks about when he's talking about the bioelectric signaling amongst cells, is that they talk to each other about how to renew and how to build and how to where to put the body parts and all of that kind of stuff. But then once in a while, a cell will say, I don't want to communicate with you anymore. And they just go off on their own. And then there's no shut off point, and they just keep proliferating. And that's what cancer is basically, stopping the communicating process. So the communion, the community, the communicating, all of that must be a very important part of the quality thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, everything working together. And I think agency is a good word to use in trying to understand what he means by freedom.
The freedom to have agency, or that agency
itself, I think, is probably a good word to use when, you know, when you talk about freedom, because that's so all encompassing. And if you're talking about where, you know, how for example, a biological an organism becomes more free, well, it gains more agency through whatever means, through evolving legs or evolving wings. You know, organisms become have more agency in groups, and so forth on up the hierarchy.
Well, that's not obvious, though, that they have more agency in groups. Or you mean they have more potential when they're working together? Is that what you mean?
They certainly have more potentials to survive, and survival and thriving is agency.
But, you know, back to the economics world, you know, because some of these things, I don't know if they map on very well, but you could certainly say something, the classic term from maybe classical economics, but then certainly in Austrian economics, is the society becomes wealthier, has more stuff, or whatever you put that, through the distribution of labor. And it's a classic kind of economics thing to start with Robinson Crusoe, and he has to produce everything, and the difference of how hierarchies then develop within the distribution of labor, etc. But to have a distribution of labor and existing, and the wider it becomes, in general, you could say we become more wealthy. Right now, and you could say that as a cell, you know, as you have a distribution of labor, some are heart, some are livers, some are bones, you know, you have more, maybe if you want to make that analogy. Just an aside though, in the last couple of years, one thing I would say is, it seems to me that distribution of labor then, but also then and it's really classic of a sort of the idea of the person in the woods who's totally self-contained. You won't be wealthy, but you're less fragile, perhaps. So we've had now a society, the global society, where maybe we have a problem in Taiwan or shipping. We know you can't, you know, I just saw a show about somebody can't get their heater fixed because the chip in Taiwan is not getting on a boat that's being unloaded, you know, somewhere in Paris, you know. So there are those parts to it. And the other one with freedom, that gets back to that free market and the exchange. At the moment of the exchange itself, the value is set in terms of what the price level is. Again, we can differentiate between price level and value and quality, but there's a price, and that price gives so much information. And this was another big part of Austrian economics, probably most through another Hayek student, Mises student, Friedrich Hayek, that's that information flow that's absolutely necessary to be able to organize the production. Otherwise, it falls apart. You don't know what to make more of. You know, if the price of oil doesn't go up, people don't know, you know, to go after and look for more and make more or something. Those signals are the fundamental transfer of information as well as goods and money. And so if the freedom is not there in the economy, it will collapse. There won't be information flow, and that top-down system, I mean, it can exist by violence. Yeah,
that's right.
It won't produce anything.
Yeah, and I think that Pirsig says, that the reason Marxism doesn't work is because it's an idea. It's an intellectual level idea enforced down on the social level, rather than, and trying to make the social level conform to the intellectual idea, rather than the social level supporting the intellectual idea. And the intellectual idea of equality is a great one. It's beautiful. It's a high quality idea. But how are you going to have equality? Are you going to force equality, or are we going to work together to make it happen because we value it as a society?
I think that's where, again, the Pirsig
Yeah.
and Austrian economics could come together well. I mean,
Yeah.
so Austrian economics, Mises was fighting against socialism his whole life.
Yeah.
The top-down approach to manage things, and he kept coming up with fundamental understanding of human action to say that can't work for human flourishing. Again, when I say it can't work, what does it mean? Maybe for Stalin it worked fine, but for the mass of people in the Soviet Union it didn't. So that's where you can see the analogies, I think, coming together. I'm trying to think back through the 4 parts I saw, and I just saw a 5th part is up now, and I just started watching it, which is interesting. There they're talking about freedom with American Native Americans, and the sense of the other part with them is how connected they were to the physical world. They lived in the physical world, and related to that, I just saw one. Peterson was interviewing his old friend, the artist from the tribe, which was quite moving. But again, that sense of, if that's the sense, to me, where the things we're talking about come together is, the economic part, the industrial part. Human beings are separated farther and farther from those pieces of the tree. And Pirsig's there in 1970 saying you need to be reconnected. It can't be just this, intellectual idea separated from all, not just your body, but all the way down, all the way up. So in that sense, the Austrian economics to me, though, was that one part of it to say is, stop doing this top down. Stop the managerial revolution that's going to, we're living under now. We're going to have one drug, one dose for all the world. That's just not a good idea. So top down from the economic standpoint in our exchange, but also, or bottoms up rather, and all the way through. But, the more things are starting from the bottom going up, and information is flowing, than top down. Now, then we can get into, though, the difference between how does that work from a religious standpoint, from where you need something above to aim at from a Petersonian view and to give direction, at least in that moral sense. This is to me what it's all those things are about, but also what Sevilla you talk about and what Karen talks about and what Peterson's talking about. I mean, how do we get back into this information going up and down that we seem to have really fallen away from?
So you're saying that one big thing you're noticing, especially when we're onto the episode about the Indians, is that we've lost touch with nature, and that's a big problem.
Yeah.
And we don't experience that as a problem because we're so surrounded by technology that we don't notice it. But you're starting to see disruptions in technology, and we're starting to notice it. And
even without those disruptions, maybe as a human being, we're, we're committing suicide, we're taking drugs, we're doing all kinds of stuff that are going off the path, maybe God-given path, or whatever, what our human nature, which is natural law, which is another topic very strong in the Austrian community, I would say, at least one part of it.
Well, it's interesting what John Vervaeke said. I think it was in the Four Horsemen video. He said, you've got Australia, which is just an ideal secular society that the Enlightenment dreamed of, and that that suicides were outpacing COVID, something like this.
It's somewhere in there like that. There's so much about what's going on today that Yeah, I mean, I think Jonathan Pageau would probably say, of course, this is all happening. We wrote it in Matthew's book. You know, it was coming along. But
Well, I think maybe this is a good time for me to pop in with a question. I know we probably don't have all day to talk about this stuff, so I do have a burning question that I want to ask Ira, and then I want Sevilla to comment on it from the Pirsig side. And that is, I read a lot of stuff. I'm on Twitter, but my Twitter feed is almost entirely pastors or philosophers. I don't have any political stuff on my feed at all. So, so I get fed a lot of interesting ideas that I can pursue. I have a few scientists on there, but mainly it's pastors and philosophers. And quite a few of the Christian philosophers are talking very negatively about capitalism. And they use the term late stage capitalism. And so with the idea that capitalism has buried within it the seeds of its own destruction, and that the late stage capitalism is destroying the world. Now, I've always avoided the use of the word capitalism to describe free market economics because I don't think they're the same thing. But is there a seed buried within Austrian economics that could lead to its own destruction? And I'm asking the question because something, I can't remember where it was, but something came up in Mike Hill's and Robert Breedlove's conversation where they were talking about where the way the world works is something will come up through this dynamic quality, and then it will become a stable system, which is kind of a holding place that prevents regression. And then something will stir it, renew it, and then it'll get going again on this path, which sounds a lot like Peterson when he talks about you have all the good things that exist within order, but then it can become static. And when it becomes too static and rigid, it needs something coming in from the outside to inject a little chaos and dynamism and kind of enliven it up again without going too far in the other direction. So I'm wondering if there's something like that within Austrian economics that has led to this. Well, first of all, do you see such a thing as late stage capitalism? And do you see anything within Austrian economics that could have contributed to it? Or is late stage capitalism a result of somebody coming in from outside trying to impose something on the economy?
Well, I had actually a very similar sense. And I wrote an article that was basically in the form of a question, and it's pretty bad. I can't remember precisely the question, but I tried to frame it in real detail to just get at the issue. And that one is to the effect, within the capitalist system that I think is the right one, free market, that hierarchies can develop, they must develop, and those are good. But you can get to the point in a world where, say, fallen human beings, but also a world where we live within a milieu of governments, that eventually those higher levels will capture the government, and now you have something that's really bad. And it's not a free market anymore. But it came out of maybe the free market, but there's so much now, say a typical Austrian view is 100 years plus of central banking in the United States is wreaking this a out of control military industrial complex, one like major funder of Google and Facebook at their origins, and how much interaction there is, and who knows, where all this is going. So that certainly now they all seem to be one big oligarchy, or small, tiny oligarchy, but spread out through these major corporations and governments together that in the old terminology seem more fascist, big business and government coming together, and that's the ideal which we all look up to. So I put that out there as a question, and I don't think there was some answers, and I saw the bionic mosquito for one, and I don't know what's inherent. There was something in that, and back to your question, Karen, is that baked in and it's always going to happen? or is there some way to avoid that? And I don't know
Well,
if there is an answer
is
to
what's
that.
baked in, is human sin what's baked into any equation?
Yeah. So, but that's the sense of the free market that I believe in, that's necessary for a flourishing. That's a necessity, but not by far the only sufficient necessity. There is getting back
because
to
within the free market there is a sort of a self-correcting mechanism.
right.
Because I can't get everything that I want unless I give you something, right?
Yeah. So there's that self-correcting and failure and entrepreneurship and regenerating.
Yeah.
But I think there's also something that, where I've come like in two directions, coming, say, from a Christian standpoint and a Austrian economic standpoint, that have now come together in a lot of people, that you can't have a free society. Say, I mean, we're talking about different things. What is the goal? Say, wealth for everybody, maybe not equal, but sufficient. But then there's also a sense of more about what human flourishing is about, say happiness or meaning or the other things that are going on. And it turns out those overlap, I think, in the sense of recognizing a sense of natural law about what governs the way human beings exist, which then might include another part that Pirsig might call dynamic quality and the way human beings are. But there are other models of that frankly, at this point in my life, I can't pin down and say Pirsig's got it all and not some other ones. But you get something from the different ones. I mean, each of them gives something that make you understand something that's too complex to understand, but they give another way, that different view that says, yeah, I understand this a bit better now. It's and that's why I like it. That's why I like, to get out of Pirsig. Not that this is going to be my worldview to go through the world, but that Pirsigian spice, it's like adding what is it in that dish that's making it? Yeah, that's dynamic quality, which might be the basic pot roast of, Christianity or something.
Yeah.
And then the Austrian economics is another part. So I would say that's a deep question, and certainly one, as somebody believes in Austrian economics, like it explains, like a physics model, like Newtonian mechanics can explain the ball falling down. So I believe it because it's my experience and how I see the world. All these other things, there's probably something there. There's more that's necessary to avoid the catastrophe that we seem to be going through.
Yeah.
And maybe that is necessary. Maybe this is biblical too, that this happens. There's a book I never read, but I've seen a lot of writing about it, called The Fourth Turning, Strauss and Howe, which is this 4 generations or something, and then there's a big catastrophe, and then you start over again in some way, a renewal.
Yeah.
And they look at American history this way. So again, another way of looking at this process, existence. I mean, what's the Asian, is it Hindus, or, there's just one big wheel and we keep revolving around it. It's, we don't have the progression like the Christians through time. So, I'm sort of like, to put it in sort of the anti-woo sense, many times I've been in a bar having a conversation that's going, I say, well, I don't know what answer to all these things, but I know I hit the bar and say, it's not all this. It's not just this material thing. And to figure out what else it is, most of our lives we're climbing up the Himalayas to get to the mountaintop to talk to somebody and explain it to us,
Oh,
so
that's a good one.
maybe it's Pirsig, I think it helps a lot.
Well, I mean, I'm getting so much out of Pajot. Speaking of which, special
certainly.
spice.
I look at the world differently than Pajot.
I mean, I'm really looking at Pajot. I would say almost more than I am Pirsig these days. I mean, of course, Pirsig's my go-to, but Pajot, I'm getting so much out of that, and it's a different way of seeing. It's a different way, but there's so much overlap.
Yeah.
Like you were saying,
the overlaps as well as the differences. And it's that picture of the cylinder,
Yeah, exactly.
From different perspectives, we see something different. Maybe we look at each end, we also see a bit about the cylinder itself that's different. So we're talking about ultimate complexity.
Yeah.
Well, it can't be just one little model, that explains it all. We're going to need maybe different models to help us in different situations going through our own lives and dealing with different people and different situations. So
No, I think that makes total sense. And I think,
see some
I
good
like,
involvement.
like this idea of capitalism. I mean, now that you've got this immune system, let's say, which is not open to change, in fact, just wants to accumulate and accumulate and accumulate, consolidate power into the system that is immune from transformation because it's in its best interest to do so. And everything Karen, you're so lucky that you don't have any political people on Twitter. So bad.
Yeah.
I went through about a year ago. My one of my daughters told me that she was getting off Twitter because it was so bad and that I should get off Twitter too. And I said, well, I should say, yes, I will do that because we should do that together. But I said, well, it's partly where I gather a lot of ideas and people that I can have on my channel, because I learn about people, I learn about books, I learn about ideas that I never would see anywhere else in the world if I'm following the right people on Twitter. So what I did then was I went through my Twitter feed. I got rid of all the political figureheads. I got rid of all the political commentators. I got rid of everybody that posts politics night and day. But I kept Jordan Peterson. And he's just almost all politics these days. So
yeah, these days, unfortunately, but
yeah.
Well, but one of the things that this is the problem is where we have a society, certainly different actors in the society, and somewhat the government that makes every single thing political.
Mhm.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
nothing that you can get away from it's a political issue now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
it's a hard thing
and
to get
I
away
mean,
from.
maybe to some extent we need to understand these things in order to be able to take a stand when the time comes, or maybe now is the time that we're taking a stand. I don't know, but
Yeah.
but I still kind of hark back to, and I was told that I was wrong about this on one of my episodes. I talked about the idea of counterfeit money, and that you'll get much better at recognizing counterfeit money if you're very familiar with real money than if you spend all your time looking at counterfeit money. So, I think we need to keep our eyes on what the real truth is and keep our gaze fixed upward. And then when the falsehood comes around, we ought to be able to recognize it a little bit better. And so this political thing is not new to me. I've been watching the catastrophe develop since 1980, when my eyes were first opened to what was going on. So there have been times when I backed off completely for 4 or 5 years and then come back into it and went, oh, wow, we've really catapulted down the hill a lot farther since the last time I looked.
And you unlike, I mean, I don't know about you, Ira, but I certainly wasn't. You actually were in politics.
Yeah, I was. Yeah. I was. And I mean, the main thing I learned when I was in politics is that principles are much better than rules. And not that principles are everything, but when you have a political system like ours, where you have two parties, it's important to know what your principles are, because both parties are broken. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't really matter which party you're adhering to. And when you're in a political system, like I was in a state legislature, the system is set up in such a way there that the party in power gets certain perks that the party out of power doesn't get. So whichever party is out of power wants to get into power because that's where the perks are, not because they have better ideas to help people with. And then the system itself has its own gatekeepers, and they have what they call the party whip. And he's called a whip because he whips you into shape and keeps you doing what they want you to do. And you can't step outside the party paradigm. And if you step outside of the party paradigm because of your principles, then you're going to lose all of any power that you might have had to affect change. And so people come in with high ideals. I'm going to affect change and help my people. But then the party says, no, you're going to do what we tell you to do. And if you don't do what we tell you to do, you're going to be stripped of all your power to do anything for people. And so people fall prey to that. And they think, well, maybe if I just knuckle under and do what they ask me to do, then I can still effect change in some little way. But you can't really. Once you knuckle under, the game is over. So this is why I really love Jordan Peterson's thing about speak the truth, regardless of what the consequences are, because the long-term consequence, which may even be after you're dead, the long-term consequence is going to be good.
Yeah, but I think the sense of it to me is there's one aspect. It's just the larger and larger organization we have, all kinds of different sense. The politics becomes more difficult. The politics is just the way people are organized and working together, say, or making decisions. And as it gets larger and larger, and this is in a company, say, as well, where it gets really hard to speak the truth. Yeah. If you go up the hierarchy that way, as it is in the government, that it's just the sense of what's the principle is to be keeping things at the lowest level possible, sort of the Catholic subsidiarity, but you can go more into, I would say on the relationships that can be more based on love and decisions made on those levels, the better chance you have of doing anything right. We have maybe a little bit aside, but there's a big controversy here in France right now because there's an expose on one of the care homes that is bad. They're expensive. And actually, my mother-in-law is in this one from this company, and the sense of the problems, though, to me are, okay, you're paying people minimum wage, or even if you're paying them 10 times minimum wage, to love your Alzheimer mother. Mm-hmm. I don't think that's ever going to work. So a society based on getting enough wealth where you can pay somebody to take care of your mother who has Alzheimer is going to keep on having problems like this. And it's that reorientation of how problems are solved, etc., that need to be addressed, and the way we need to. And again, they're so fundamental. It's oh, I have a job I want. It's a great job. I'm going to go live. I moved across the, from one continent to another one, and then, well, I'm not as close then to my mother, my brother, who would need me for different things. And so this is the way we're working. This is that part where globalization, say, is, wow, we have way more wealth, but we're more fragile. There's the things that are so fundamental to us, and we're far away from them to even recognize them so much anymore. This is, I think, where all the things that both of you, again, I'm overwhelmed by how much podcasting. I can't take it anymore. But I tried to watch both of yours as much as I can, and some others to get to find the words, to find the techniques, to find the perspective, to be dealing with the people around you, to get everybody not to think alike, but to be on the same page of where we are. Where now it's, as Peugeot would say, we're so fragmented. There's almost nothing to agree upon. That's what.
Well, so that's an interesting idea. If the idea is that we need to keep everything as much as possible on the local level, and this goes to Pirsig, right? That you ratchet up within a system up to a certain level, and then then those little systems start working together, and then that builds another system, and then but every time it's a bunch of little local systems working together that move up into another level, right? Yeah, but if we fragment to the point where there are no systems working together at all, but it's just all, just all particles, then that's the heat death of the universe, So,
yeah, and it is kind
or
of
also the one fixed pole, that makes it too stiff.
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
Karen had a guest that talked about the architecture in Japan. It needs freedom, and it needs stiffness. Both.
Exactly. Perfect. Yeah, and I think the problem that we're having, and if you look at it through the the evolutionary levels, is we're doing great. The ideas are flowing and everything's there's so much happening on the intellectual level, but we're neglecting the social level. And that is supporting us. That is supposed to support us. The level below needs to, like, what is it? Inform, and what's the other one from the bottom
Express.
up?
Express.
Yes. And
Okay.
without that expression, without that support, the fragmentation's happening.
And it probably happens also like going down into the biological level, because if our social level is fragmented, then we're not treating the biological level the way we ought to be. And so it cannot also express upwards.
That's exactly right. And we're becoming, I guess in general, like Ira said, we're so disconnected from the biological level that because we're so supported by this intellectual, technological immune system that the social levels and the biological levels are really beginning to suffer. And then that's the support. So like that graphic he was showing, like when this falls apart, then, that's it.
The center cannot hold, huh? I don't want to leave it there, but we've been going for an hour and 45 minutes, and I don't know how many people can stay with us this long. So maybe we could do this again.
I'd love to.
Okay. Yeah. Let's have a part 2. And because obviously Mike Hill and Robert Breedlove thought this through extensively, and they came up with this very thoughtful series with all the beautiful illustrations and everything, which I'm going to put in the show notes for people. Please watch that, because we can't begin to cover all of it, but we will pick here and there and keep going, because this is fascinating. I've learned so much from both of you today, and look forward to talking again.
Yes, me too.
Because we don't want to leave it at the point where the world is falling apart and there's no hope.
Biological level. Ira, it was great to meet you. Thanks so much for like filling us in on Austrian economics. Is coming to the fore. Robert.
I can just give you one little anecdote just at the end. When I first heard of Zen and the motorcycle van is when I was in graduate school in mechanical engineering, and my advisor was using that book to teach like the first year in design course that they were reading Zen.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure what he was looking more of the sense of the motorcycle itself, I think, of way of thinking about it, not necessarily into the philosophy for those type of students. But then, I read it because I had heard about Jordan Peterson from a blogger in Austrian economics, that then maybe follow Peterson like crazy, where I saw your work. And then I said, okay, I got to read this. And then maybe now I'm going to have to read Lila.
Lila's worth reading. And now you've got that, because Mike Hill that series is great. He knows it way better than I do. And he did a really nice primer.
Yeah, no, they're really interesting and very, they remind me both of one of your partners of Christopher Mastropietro.
Yeah.
It's just I could just sit there listening, and it's almost like poetry.
Yes, he's one of the most eloquent people I've ever met. I haven't met him in real life, but encountered.
Yeah, no, and so both those two, though, I find also extremely articulate, to a level, and knowledgeable.
Yeah.
Again, some of the details of the analogies they're making, maybe as Karen alluded to, I can go, well, but it's more just enjoyable just to follow it through, and doesn't have to pick at each detail. Maybe that's a Pirsig type way of thinking about things too.
And he's and because Breedlove is he's this let's say pundit figurehead. I don't know what you'd say. He's a representative of a representative for Bitcoin. So naturally, all the series have to somehow tie into that.
Yeah.
Well, it's fascinating how it ties into Bitcoin.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's
kind of mind blowing. Yeah. Okay, we'll save that for another time. Talk to you guys later.
Bye.
Bye.
Next time. Bye.